Hi, this is The Basics, a multi-part series about all the basics to do with photography. Everything from what is a camera and how do I hold it, all the way up to how do I do post-processing. It'll be both in this studio as well as beyond these walls in the field. Join me. Today, for lesson 3, we are going to be talking about ISO. Now ISO, and yes, it is pronounced ISO, although you hear people say that it's ISO. It's ISO in reference to the Egyptian god Isis. But ISO is the sensitivity of the sensor. Okay, so it is essentially, if we go back to the episode lesson 2, we know that ISO is essentially our fill line in that bucket. So this is how sensitive the sensor is. The more our sensitivity, the brighter our image is going to come out, because we don't need as much light to hit the sensor in order to give us a good exposure. Now, that being said, we do need to understand in a little bit more detail what are the effects that ISO has. So if I have an ISO value of, say, 50, and let's say that goes all the way up to 3200. Now, most cameras will do more than 3200. They'll do significantly more than 3200. But I just wanted to give kind of a broad range. This is usually about as far as film will go. I think there are a few that go higher, and we'll discuss why that might not be a good option. But typically, this is going to be darker, right? We're less sensitive, so we need more light, we need longer shutter speeds, more open apertures, and of course, this is going to be brighter. Okay. Now, 1 EV, as we discussed last time, this is making something 2 times as bright. We just multiply by 2. So 50 to 100, that's a difference of 1 AV. From 1600 to 800, right? If we're reducing, that's also 1 EV. This is plus 1 EV, this is negative 1 EV. So we've got darker, we've got brighter. You're probably asking the question, why do we ever want to use very high ISOs? Because, or perhaps, why don't we ever not want high ISOs, depending on your philosophy on how you feel about shutter speed? And the rough answer is, and this is not just with digital, but also with physical film media, although the process is slightly different, this is going to be less noisy. And this is going to be more noisy. So noise is essentially just, you can think of it kind of as random, minute electrical errors. That can be due to, just errant reflections or what have you. Point being is that if you have a less sensitive lens, the only thing that's going to activate those pixels is intense light, or light that has been hitting it for a long time. As where if you have 3200 ISO, it's going to be more noisy, because all of those little minute things, each one of them is going to get picked up. If we can think about it in the bucket analogy, imagine it's raining outside. If we have a really high ISO, we run a really small fill line. So the rain is going to get in there, right? But if we have a really high water line, then more of that is going to be made up of the stuff coming out of the spigot. Okay, that's kind of a very rough analogy of what's going on. So we often want to bias towards lower ISO values because we are going to have less noise, which means our images are going to be cleaner. And when we talk about cleanness, the real reason that we care about cleanness is that often our Less noise is going to mean it's sharper, it has more detail. It also means that when we're working in post, we get better reproduction of what we see, as well as when you're doing denoising, that also kills your sharpness. It has to make judgments about what the noise is supposed to be, and the more noisy you are, the harder that is. So generally speaking, you want lower ISOs. That being said, there are a lot of situations where you need higher ISOs. For example, if you need a faster shutter speed, say you're shooting sports or something to that effect, then you might need a higher ISO because otherwise you won't be able to freeze the action. You'll see everything as a blur in your camera rather than seeing a basketball player dribble down the court, for example. So there are reasons why we would use high ISO, and there are reasons why we would use low ISO. Now, typically speaking, in landscape photography, because we have time and our subjects aren't moving extremely quickly, on the order of geologic time, so we tend to use the less sensitivity, the smaller numbers. And as I mentioned, sports will tend to use these. Wildlife will also tend to use higher ISO numbers because they're attempting to freeze action. They want their shutter speed as high as possible. Now, there is one thing that's a quirk of modern digital cameras that I should mention. And if you're just wondering what ISO does, we've covered it. But here's the last little bit, is modern sensors are what are called dual gain. So what this means is there are different ways of increasing the sensitivity. So what a dual gain will typically have is, say, a base ISO, and a base ISO is the lowest number that you have on the camera. So for example, Canon starts at 100, Nikon starts at 64, if I'm remembering correctly. So we'll go with 100 for our base. So we have our base of 100, and then when the ISO is between 100 and 400, there is analog gain. So what analog gain is, it's actually changing the sensor and what the sensor is doing. And then from 400 on, you might have digital gain. So what this means is that we might be shooting something at like 300 ISO, but if we shot it at 500, not only would we be able to get a faster shutter speed, we might also have less noise. So it's something to be aware of. If you're just starting out, it's probably not that much of a difference, but you might notice that sometimes when you're down in this range, you have worse noise than when you're above 400, or whatever the dual gain cutoff is for your particular camera. So it's something to be aware of. It's not, your eyes are not tricking you, your camera's not broken, it's just the difference in method of changing the gain. And that's going to do it for this lesson of the basics. I'll see you when I see you.